questions? Is there anything in the chat? Looks like it. Mudipa says, thank you for such an insightful presentation. Out of interest, how and where does South African nuclear plants safely discard nuclear waste?
Certainly, thank you very much. So the nuclear waste is categorized generally into three forms. There's what is called low-level waste, which is really material that is used in the form of, it's actually got low radioactivity, followed by what is called medium-level waste, and those are contained in drums, and they are sent to be stored in a well-studied and well-regulated repository called the Valputs, somewhere in the Northern Cape. So that's where it's stored for the low-level and medium waste. But for what is traditionally called high-level waste, which is used nuclear fuel from the reactors, at this point in time, it is stored at the facilities for nuclear power plants. It's stored at Quebec in Cape Town. For Necsa, it is stored here in Pelindaba, under strict regulations of the nuclear regulator, as well as the international obligations in the form of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tyabashe. And if I'm not mistaken, it's actually the regulations around these are extremely strict, so that there is almost no chance of anyone coming into contact with them.
Yes, certainly. And also the shielding that is provided to that which is sent to Valputs, is put in concrete drums and waste drums, and the background radiation on the sides of those drums is probably better than in some of the places that we live in that have got most granite rocks close by.
Right, yes. There's an amount of radiation in the earth itself already. Yes. Thank you. Paul Lechwati says, this is an interesting presentation. Nuclear new build will result in an increased job opportunities, both direct and indirect. My worry is that South Africa has taken too long to make new nuclear build a reality. This leads to lower but much needed baseload capacity as the economy grew. What is the potential timeline to implement this program now to alleviate a supply pressure, especially in light of load shedding and potential export costs on carbon-intensive industries? What can we learn from Egypt from conceptualizing the program to implementation?
Thank you. I think that's a very good question. How countries have done it, you see record construction timelines in the UAE recently with the 3 units, which was in the order of 6 to 7 years. In China, we see even shorter durations for big nuclear plants, size of Quebec and slightly above. You see those number of years primarily because the planning gets to be done quite well upfront. So that because the construction time that is counted for nuclear plants is when you start now having the regulator saying, construct the power plant. We are happy with your design and everything. One of the facilities that I visited, where they were building 6 nuclear units, a license had been granted for 1, and the other 5, it had not been granted, but all the infrastructure, the roads leading to the site, the roads around the site, the infrastructure in terms of electrical supplies that are needed, everything, the holes had been dug, getting ready to say you can start the nuclear-related foundation or the foundation for the facility that will be hosting the nuclear components. So there's a lot of upfront planning. There's a lot of what is generally called in heavy construction activities, the early site works that can be done. And if you do those well, you actually shorten the actual construction of time. It's like having to construct your house. If you don't have the authorization by the local council as yet, in the form of approved plans and everything else, you can do a whole lot of things around your yard, wherein you clear it off, where you get ready for site establishment. So it talks about being proactive in terms of your planning. That's your traditional plants. But now the talk is around the small modular reactors. And these small modular reactors I would say that there's only one that is currently in operation in China, which takes the form of what we used to have here as a PBMR that was in concept. These small modular reactors promise to even have shorter construction time in the order of 3 to 4 years from the actual start of nuclear construction to commissioning and connection to the grid and commercializing it. So there's a definite move, and I think the nuclear industry still has a lot to learn from many industries in the form of licensing. The aeronautics industry is an area that the nuclear industry needs to learn from. In that, if a Boeing is licensed to land in one country, it generally is licensed to land in many countries because there is a link and an agreement between the different air regulators. I made a Boeing or an Airbus or whatever name of the plane so that I'm not accused to be biased towards one company versus the others. So in terms of regulation, I think there's a lot we can learn which can expedite the timelines. In terms of operations, nuclear operates in a very much like an international community that shares lessons, already we're miles ahead. But in terms of the construction as well, there are many components that are classified as nuclear equipment, which is actually not nuclear equipment. We should move towards standardizing much of the equipment to be more like your off-the-shelf components, which are industry, which meet the general industry standards.
Right. Very interesting. I certainly didn't know that. Right. Have sites been identified for new nuclear reactors?
Yes. So South Africa had 5 nuclear sites identified in the old program. And I think now I'll speak and say, I don't know what is happening at this point in time, but 5 sites were identified. There were 2 sites in the Northern Cape and closer to the Namibian side in the Atlantic Ocean. There's a Quebec site, which currently houses Quebec units, and it still has more land to accommodate more units. There was a site near Hermanus called Bantam's Clip. There's also a site in the Eastern Cape near Jeffreys Bay called Thyspunt. Those are the sites that were identified in the 80s. I want to believe that more sites could be identified in this country, provided obviously the company that's given the mandate to do that site identification is done. And I must add on and say that for the Thyspunt site and the Denefontein site, which is where Quebec is, lots of work has been done in the form of the environmental impact assessments. That work was submitted to the Department of Environmental Affairs back then, it's DEFF now. And also in the form of the nuclear site installation license applications, which have been sent to the National Nuclear Regulator. So there's a lot of publicly available information, especially for those 2 sites for nuclear power. But I believe more can be identified, and I think we.
Thank you. Mkhize says, good morning all. Thank you for the interesting presentation, Mr. Tyabashe. Is South Africa considering using nuclear to solve the electricity problem? If yes, when can we expect to see progress in this area? I think you have answered that with your presentation, actually.
Yes, I think the integrated resource plan does have nuclear in it, even though, let me state that whilst we have 2 units that are already in operation, for new megawatts coming onto the grid between now and 2030, which is when it ends, there is 0 nuclear. And for me, I'm looking forward to the announcement that said a new integrated resource plan for electricity will be coming out for public comment, I think this week or next week. And I'm looking with hawk's eyes to see what it says about nuclear.
Yes, indeed. What factors are taken into account for selecting a nuclear site? That's a question from Megan Cole.
Yeah. Multiple factors, and I think nuclear sites are probably the most studied sites on this earth. And most importantly is the seismicity. We did, as South Africa, a seismic study, seismic analysis for the site near Jeffreys Bay. It was the first of a kind internationally. It had international experts all the way from the US and the UK. It's called, it's under what is called the SHAC system, which is near seismic hazard assessment. It had been done, I think, in Switzerland, and it failed. Lessons were learned, and South Africa was the first one to publish those studies. And those are also published internationally, even in international journals. So seismicity becomes important. But it's everything to air and wind speeds on the site, the topography of the site, availability of water, access to the site itself, the development around the site in terms of how dense, in terms of population density you have, the feasibility of executing an emergency plan, if you have to have one. So it's a whole range of studies. And like I'm saying, I think nuclear plants are the most studied sites. Nuclear sites are the most studied sites. But also, I must add that people can just, for themselves, check on the websites, the EIA that has been done for the 2 sites under question to see the extent of the studies done, as well as the application to the NNR for the nuclear siting installation.
Right. Thank you very much. Yes, I think we are much more thorough with nuclear power plants than we are with any other power plants. And certainly there wasn't that kind of assessment for coal-fired power plants when they were built. Right, another question is from Titus Mate. Is 2.5 gigawatt nuclear allocation adequate to attract long-term investments? Should South Africa's nuclear build focus on conventional nuclear technology or move to the next generation of nuclear technology, for example, SMRs, etc.?
A very good question from my colleague, Dr. Mate. Thanks for the question. For me, if you had to ask me, I think 2.5 gigawatts is a drop in an ocean. As you can see on the previous slides, countries that have decarbonized, they are well above 20% of nuclear installed capacity in those respective countries. Taking into account that we don't have hydro in this country because we are a water scarce country, I would imagine that nuclear needs to play a role in the order of 30% and above. So 30% currently, with an installed grid of about 53 gigawatts, would be in the form of 15 5 times 3, yeah. So 30% of installed capacity, I would say that's about the good ballpark to attract, number one, industry, because when you have these plants coming through, you have an industry that comes with them. And it is important that you keep them going with in terms of refurbishments that will be needed. We've seen it, I think France has got a very classical case of having a well-oiled machine in terms of the industry that supplies and supports the nuclear power industry. So I think 2.5 is a drop in an ocean. And as you can tell, that will be my input to the IRP when it comes up. If any nuclear capacity is lower than 20-30%.
Right.
And the second part of that question was whether we need to focus on small or big plants in the form of traditional plants or the small modular reactors. I want to believe that we need to focus on both. There is a room for big plants because they provide reliable base load for 60 years. And the small plants are still not commercially proven. We're still talking about concepts of different SMRs. And my view is that whilst we focus on the big plants to resolve the issue, as soon as those plants get commissioned, we need to look at the new and the upcoming SMR, small modular reactors.
Okay, interesting. I'm just going to the Q&A boxes. An anonymous attendee says, given the major issues with construction and operation of Medupi and Kusile, is it wise to build nuclear plants in South Africa from a safety point of view?
Yeah, so I think if we look at the case studies that are in the public domain for Medupi and Kusile, there is no safety issue that comes with it. It was just construction delays. What I always say is that major plants, major projects, not even plants, be it roads, be it stadiums, be it whatever, They fail not because they're nuclear, they fail because they're huge infrastructure projects that require upfront planning. So you need to do proper planning, obviously not plan until the end of time, but plan with a clear view of milestones. So planning becomes very important. And my belief is that this country has got the capability to build nuclear power plants. And as you know, a plant designer and constructor will come in supplemented by the South African expertise as well. You don't just say South African says a plant on paper, build it on your own. The original equipment manufacturer or the original designer will come and support and make sure that we build the plant according to the design. So we have more than adequate capability and capacity to build nuclear plants. And I think the delays in the other coal plants is an issue of planning. And that's what the studies have shown.
Interesting. Right. Let me just make sure that I've got Dr. Marty's. Yes, I've got Marty's. Dr. Marty's questions. In the chat, there was another question. No, it was Vilna. Yes, Vilna Xtien's been posting in the chat the other discussion forums that NSDF has held on the topic. So you can have a look at that, audience. Any other questions? I saw a hand at some stage, but I'm not sure if that person's questions have been answered.
I mean, they still have their hand up. It's Muzi Manzi.
Okay. Muzi, please, please speak up. For some reason, I can't see you. Oh, I probably have to allow you to speak, which means that I do have to look you up. My apologies.
I also can see them on the list of attendees. So,
Oh my goodness. Okay, the hand has now disappeared. So I'm assuming that that has been dealt with. There's still so much I want to ask, but I think that we can wrap it up now. And thank you very much, Loyiso, for your interaction with us today and your, of course, your expertise, sharing your expertise with us so that we get a good perspective on what the problems are and where South Africa stands, because nuclear is indeed a very emotional issue and people react with their emotions and they don't think about the reality and the facts of nuclear reactors, and as well with South Africa. We have a very good track record and great expertise indeed, and the safety record is perfect. So I am very glad that we could have this input directly from yourself. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much. It was certainly a pleasure, and at your service any day, anytime. Thanks, Yancy.
Thank you.
The participants as well.
Thank you very much. Right. We have yesterday, if I can do a brief recap, we looked at various transitions. We heard about the just transition and the plans in that regard. We heard from private sector. We heard from the Technology Innovation Agency about the ways in which new ideas can be brought to market. And there were various transitions that we were looking at. The transition to solar power, also the grid. We heard a lot from Professor Becker about systems, electricity systems. And certainly whatever is being planned will have to be approached from a systems point of view, because the problems are complex. We have various sources of energy that are in the mix, and so they have to be unified and coordinated, brought together. And certainly with the expansion of the grid, there will have to be thorough planning to incorporate everything. I do hope that the government will get moving on this very soon. I mean, there does seem to be new energy in government to tackle the problems head on and to make sure that the load shedding crisis is ended. But that is my point of view and my perspective.